Oh. And now we're going full Vanessa Selps with the clickback war. So this is 50-100 no limit heads up on PokerStars back when Daniel Negreanu was still a professional for PokerStars. He was still a sponsored pro. And ISILDUR was also a sponsored pro, and he was probably the best guy out of the entire field. So they're playing heads up. This took place about 10 years ago. So back then, 3x was quite common, which is what ISILDUR employs. At 100 big blinds, I think a slightly smaller sizing makes a little bit more sense, right around 2.5x, but it's by no means a big deal. It does change the game a little bit, but I'm sure ISILDUR is smart enough to know how. So he goes 3x, and let's see what happens. So Daniel goes for a 1K 3-bet, which is definitely too small. He's giving ISILDUR a pretty good price to play in position here when he has a 12.5K stack. I think a massive 3-bet is not really necessary because if ISILDUR raises a really wide range, really small, he can actually get quite a few folds despite the small 3-bet, right? Because ISILDUR is probably opening like 80% of his hands or so, maybe even more. So he can get a lot of folds for cheap, but at the same time, he doesn't want ISILDUR to play really deep stacked in position. So I would have liked a slightly bigger 3-bet. Now, King Queen 3 is obviously a really good board for Daniel because he's gonna 3-bet kings always, queens always. Threes probably not back then, right? Most players probably didn't 3-bet depolarized enough back then. I do expect hands like ace king, of course, to be in his range. King jack suited, probably king queen off as well. So he's got all the high equity draws as well. So he's doing very well on this board. Meanwhile, ISILDUR will have hands like king queen and threes, but he's not gonna have hands like ace king, etc. So he's gonna have to play pretty passively here. I have no clue what Daniel's gonna do, but let's see. So I like that the footage is sped up. That makes things easier. So Daniel goes for a 60% pot bet, which is all right. So he's basically saying I've got like a good queen or better and a king. Maybe I'm merge betting hand like seven sometimes, etc. So I'm betting some of my better draws, but I'm probably also going to check sometimes. Back then, before Pio Solver came out, you didn't really see much range betting, right? Maybe some guys bet close to range on very dry boards, but definitely not on this board. So the 10 is a really scary card for both players because both of them can have ace jack, jack 9, two pair, hearts. So Daniel's going to have to be quite careful now. I expect a lot of checks here, and it's not like he can just blast it with 5K on the turn. So I'm saying, guys, you got to be careful here. This card is really scary, right? And they're basically saying, fuck you. I'm not scared of this 10 of hearts at all. I'm going to continue to value bet. Daniel says with a 3/4 pot bet, and ISILDUR shoves, saying he's basically got, probably two pair plus, but probably even better than that because Daniel's repping a hand like two pair plus. So I'm expecting pretty strong ranges from both players here. So Daniel 3-bet ace king suited pre-flop, which is obviously the best play. I like the c-bet on the flop generally, and I like the fact that ISILDUR just called with the weak flush draw. I like his pre-flop call too. But Daniel then, overplayed his hand a little bit. He bets kind of big, knowing ISILDUR can have ace jack, jack 9, those two pairs, those hearts, right? And then ISILDUR shoves, and then he still calls. So he has to put ISILDUR in a lot of weak hands. Hands like, for instance, the ace of hearts with like a 10 or a 3, or maybe merge shoving a hand like ace queen with a heart, or maybe a hand like queen jack. ISILDUR was very, very aggressive back then, so maybe Daniel gave him credit for those hands, but this is definitely quite loose. They're also a little bit deeper. It is heads up no limit, and you have wide ranges, but this runout is legitimately scary. If this were like the 10 of spades, it would be a way better play, right? And he gets it in dead against ISILDUR, who fast plays. So ISILDUR is probably thinking, well, Daniel is not capable of folding hands like aces or king, queen, whatever. I just want to fast play. And maybe I'll slow play a different hand sometimes. Maybe if I got like queen, seven of hearts, right? I got the board all locked up. Maybe I'll slow play that. But I think Daniel's got it. If I shove, he's not going to fold. But, if I just call, a lot of rivers kill my action, or, Daniel just check and maybe finds a miracle fold. So I don't mind his shove necessarily. As for how do we rate the play? So in case you haven't seen our videos yet or our streams, we always rate every play from both players after the hand. I'll give Daniel, I'll give him a 5.5 out of 10. I like the 3-bet and the C-bet. The turn bet is loose, but all right. And then, calling the turn shove is also quite loose, but against a guy like ISILDUR, you can't blame him. And ISILDUR, I'll give him an 8 out of 10. Yeah. Actually, I'll give him an 8.5 out of 10. Yeah. I like it. It's a good, combination of just a solid play as well as making an adjustment against his opponent. And I've been watching these guys play forever, so I kind of know how they play as well. I've never played with Daniel Negreanu before, so I've played one hand with ISILDUR online, and I've played with him maybe 2-3 hours live. Yeah, I remember checking the nuts to him in a big pot, and then it got checked down, and I felt like an idiot. So that was pretty cool. It was Mexican on my direct left and ISILDUR on my direct right. All right, so ISILDUR gets the button again, and again he makes it 3x. Daniel calls one rent in Romania and checks it to ISILDUR. So this is a board Jack 8. This is a board that I expect people to play very differently now than back in the day. Nowadays, people would see bet this board at a pretty high frequency. Some people even bet on full range, and they bet for like third pot or even smaller, quarter pot perhaps. So back then, I expect people to bet more like half pot or something. So let's see what happens. And definitely not with their full range. So ISILDUR ends up betting 500 into 600. So he bets one Maltese rent. And I'm not a huge fan of this sizing because the board is so dry. There's no flush draw out there. There's a couple of straight draws out there, right? Also, the jack is pretty good for Daniel. When he defends pre-flop to 3x, he's going to defend a lot of hands with a jack in it. So he has to be a bit more careful. So I think he should have sized down a little bit to a maximum of half pot. Of course, you can't say, hey, but look what PokerStars says. Well, that's not fair because they're playing in an era before PokerStars. So when he bets like this big, he's going to check back quite often, I believe. And Daniel goes for a $1,400 check raise sizing. That's actually a pretty sweet sizing. That's like a rent in Amsterdam, let's say. So he check raises to one Amsterdam rent, and I really like his check raise sizing, going slightly less than 3x. That's an awesome play. He got it exactly right. Just still check raising against ISILDUR's wide range. Just still check raising, but not too big, and just getting ISILDUR to fold a lot of air on this dry board. This is a really sweet play. So big props to Daniel so far. And so on the turn, let's see what he does. I'm expecting more of a big bet because he's probably saying I've got a jack or I'm bluffing, right? He's got plenty of jacks. He's got plenty of bluffs because the board is now somewhat draw heavy. So let's see. I'm expecting a bet size between 2,500 and 3K somewhere. Drum roll. 2,700. All right, I got it right. And so this run out is pretty blank now. 10-9, Queen 10, Queen 9, 9-7, spades. They all missed. I guess 7-5 suited is a straight now. But does Daniel really check raise 7-5 suited against a $500 into $600 bet? Probably not, right? But who knows? So it'll be interesting to see what Daniel bets here. I'm assuming it's going to be something like 3/4 pot, like 6 point something K. I wouldn't be shocked if he shoved. Let's see what he does. If he has a jack, he does have to worry about ISILDUR having a better jack, because if Daniel had a hand like ace-jack, for instance, he would often 3-bet. So he's already removed a couple of his stronger jacks. So he doesn't just want to bet jack 5 suited here for large sizing and, mostly get called by better, right? So it'll be very interesting to see what he shows up with. About 3/4 pot, all right. And ISILDUR folds. So when ISILDUR snap folds here, it tells me he could have had a draw. If ISILDUR had a hand like aces, kings, queens, nines, king 8, ace 8, that type of stuff, he would have thought about it a bit longer probably, unless he just made his decision before Daniel bet. So when he snap folds, it tells me he had a hand like queen nine of spades, for instance, right? A hand that can just never ever call. And Daniel probably had it, but we'll never know. So anyway, let's rate the plays. So I'll give Daniel. I mean, we don't know what he had, but I'll give him an 8.5 out of 10. And Isildur, I'll give him a 7 out of 10. But it's tough to rate this one, right? Let's do another one. This is fun. All right, so we've got a completely different strategy here. We've got KidPoker min raising the button. I think that his min raise probably works slightly better than the 3x sizing, but it's a completely different strategy, but the EVs are quite similar. So Isildur calls the min raise, so his range is going to be quite wide. I mean, heads up with low rake. Maybe they were not even paying any rake because they've got they've got sponsorships, so they can defend a very, very wide range. So Daniel can be pretty aggressive here. I mean, he just has all of the good hands here, right? And if Isildur had a hand like King Jack suited or Ace King or Kings, etc., he would just often 3-bet preflop. And the board is quite dry. The Isildur is often just going to miss with hands like 10-8 offsuit, etc. So Daniel gets to be quite aggressive here. Let's see what he does. So he goes half pot here, which is fine. Most players nowadays would use an even smaller sizing, but again, you can't blame him for having made this play 10 years ago, right? So I actually like the fact that he didn't go for like a full pot sizing or like a 3/4 pot sizing. He sized down a little bit. So you see that even though some of the bet sizes could be polished a bit, you see that their instincts are very, very good, right? You see clearly that these guys are elite thinkers, even if nowadays a lot of these strategies wouldn't work quite as well anymore. So don't mind this half pot bet. And Isildur check raises quite large. I think he can probably raise a little bit smaller than this, but it is a board in which you get to attack quite aggressively. It's just a board in which, I mean, I said Isildur doesn't have a whole lot, but then again, Daniel also doesn't have a whole lot, right? Because he's also going to have hands like 10-8 offsuit a lot and just miss. So nobody's really that strong on this board. Let's see. Daniel contemplating his decision. And he actually decides to 3-bet, which is something you don't see often on a board like this. The board is so dry and so locked down that you don't see many people 3-bet. It's also a board on which you don't need to 3-bet very often because, as I said, you don't really need protection, right? If you have a hand like King 9 suited, you don't really need protection because you're only really worried about an ace, right? Maybe like a 5 or a 6, 7, maybe those are not great cards, but you're not that worried. Whereas if the board is maybe like 9 high or 10 high or 8 high, you're much more concerned in case you have, let's say, a good overpair. So if I do like the 3-bet sizing, I think that's really good if you want to 3-bet at all. So, and back then probably everybody 3-bet the flop, right? So I actually think this is a great play. Another great play by Daniel. Maybe he had 10-5 offsuit, right? In which case it's a horrendous play. But at least the sizing I think is quite good. I like it. Oh. And now we're going full Vanessa Selps with the clickback war.
Vanessa re-raises a 4-bet to 79,000.
Not quite not quite all in. So Isildur is basically saying I've got 2 pair or better, right? And maybe not all of them because if he had a hand like King 4 offsuit, he might just call this 3-bet, hoping that Daniel just shows up with a hand like, who knows, right? Ace 5 or something like that. Queen Jack. It could be so many hands. So I don't think he's bluffing very often. I don't think he takes a hand like Queen Jack and just 3-bets with no equity. Daniel, as far as I know, is not the craziest player ever, so I don't think he's going to go crazy bluffing himself. So I don't think Isildur is going to go crazy. But who knows, right? Who knows what happened back then? All in. Wow. Okay. So Isildur ships his 1. No run it twice. So Daniel 3-bets with King Queen offsuit here on the flop, which is actually, I mean, it's not the worst play. He's thinking Isildur never has Ace King anyway. So I'm only behind against 3s, 4s, King 4, King 3, and 3-4. The issue is that that's quite a few hands, right? And, Isildur has to be check raising hands like King 9, King 10, and then be calling. So I don't hate the 3-bet. but is on the loose side. ISILDUR check raise with bottom 2. This hand is sometimes good to call with, right? Sometimes calling 2 pair, so you might as well call this one. And he ends up 4 betting the flop. I mean, it's like okay. It's okay. I'll give both of them a 6 out of 10. So that's something you definitely saw in high stakes poker was Daniel overplaying quite a few hands, often having like top pairs of weak kickers and just putting in the money in quite deep. And so he was ahead of his opponent a lot, but then he basically raised and let them fold all their air and then just isolated himself against good hands. And you're kind of seeing that as well, right? So maybe in this meta game, King 10, King Jack are easy get-ins for ISILDUR, but I don't think they were. So I think this is a bit on the loose side. So yeah, I'll give them both. I'll give them both a 6 out of 10. What do you guys think about that one? That's something you never see anymore, right? A 200 zoom, let's say, 3 bet, 4 bet, 5 bet shove. All right, so we've got KidPoker on the button again, and again he min raises, which I really don't mind. So 10-3 deuce is a little bit similar to the last board. It's just a board that you don't really hit very often, right? The 10 is very good for both of them, but the 3 and the deuce not so much. They will have some of them. I mean, they're playing heads up. It's a min raise pot, but it's still those cards are still not that common. So Daniel can be pretty aggressive on this board. I'm guessing he's going to bet half pot, which I wouldn't mind. He does. And ISILDUR again goes for a large check raise. And once again, I'm going to say I think he could size down a little bit. He's applying a lot of pressure on his opponent, but because of this sizing, he's a little bit too polarized, I believe. And back then, players didn't check raise quite as much as they do now. So they were just saying, yeah, I've got 2 pair, maybe a very strong 1 pair, and not much else. So this is a board on which 3 betting would make a little bit more sense than on the previous board. I mean, there's a flush out there. The board is king high, 10 high. So you got a hand like jacks. It might make sense to 3 bet, as long as you're balanced. And he does 3 bet against the 2200. All right. It seems like I'm just repeating the same video.
Correct reaction.
Or the same hand. But no, I swear it's a different board. So we see exactly the same as we did before. All right. So Daniel does the same thing. He 3 bets in position with ace 10, which makes a lot more sense than in the previous hand, 3 betting king queen. And ISILDUR gets it in with a king high flush draw. I like Daniel's play, right? With that dynamic of 3 betting the flop, I don't mind that, and I don't mind getting it in. ISILDUR's play is a little bit more questionable. Of course, he could 3 bet pre-flop sometimes, but I don't mind the flat call. I don't mind the check raise at all. But when Daniel 3 bets here, I assume that he's almost never folding. So you're basically putting it in against better flush draws and hands like these. So yeah, I think ISILDUR could just call. He's got a really good price on a call. So if you have no fold equity, I think this is too light. If he believes Daniel's folding like 30-40%, then sure, shoving is best, right? Even if you get it in decent, I guess. But if you believe you have no fold equity, then calling is definitely better. Oh, so ugly. Such an ugly run out. All right, so back to ISILDUR now, who raises 3x. We've seen that. So Daniel only has 76.5 big blinds, so now his 3 bet sizing may change a little bit, but he calls. So this is a board in which most people tend to size up on, right? It's very, very draw heavy. I mean, so many flush draws, straight draws, overcards. Super relevant board. So I actually don't mind the sizing my ISILDUR. I like it actually. So 500 into 600 and Daniel calls. So he's saying, he's got like a decent pair, a decent draw mostly. Occasionally he's got a trap. But he doesn't have that many traps, right? Because if he had a hand like pocket 8s or 10s, he would always 3 bet pre-flop. So maybe he has a hand like 5 sometimes, waiting for the clean turn, waiting for ISILDUR to bomb the turn and then shove. But I expect Daniel's range to be quite weak. And ISILDUR again goes for a near pot size bet. I like it. He could even go a little bit bigger if he likes. But I like the fact that he goes for the big bet. And Daniel does shove. All right. All right. Interesting. So Daniel doesn't 3 bet 8-7 suited, which is okay sometimes, but mostly you want to 3 bet a hand like this. And he calls the flop, which is standard. And then on the turn, he must be thinking, well, I know I don't have the best hand always, but I have no clubs in my hand, and Isildur can have hands like Jack 9 and Queen Jack. Maybe he's just barreling with hands like King Queen or Ace 4. So I'm gonna basically shove my hand for protection, right? So once I get it in, I'm not going to get it in great, but I'm gonna have a lot of folds here. I'm going to get a lot of folds because Isildur has so many bluffs. And Isildur fast play pocket fives, and that's the only way to play our hand. So I'll give Daniel I'll give him a 6.5 out of 10. I think the play again looks a bit punty, but it's much better than it looks. And I'll give Isildur, I'll give him a 9.5 out of 10. I mean, it's not rocket science, building the pot with a set, with bottom set especially, but I like the big bet on the flop. I like the big bet on the turn. I know he used to overbet a lot, and he didn't on the turn. So had he bet a little bit bigger, I think I would have given him a 10. But it's not like a spot where you don't need to bet 3K or something, right? Because now you're giving Daniel too much money to go after with a shove. So I actually really like Isildur's play. Hand 6. So we've got Daniel min raising the button again. Isildur 3-bet to 9 big blinds, which is fine. Most guys go a little bit bigger, but Daniel did 3-bet on this open on the small side. In fact, as small as you can raise. And Jack 9-6 is a pretty good board for both players because both guys are going to have some sets. Both players will have some flush, straight draws, not flush draws, I'm pretty sure. They're going to have overcards, and they're going to have a lot of pairs, right? Some 2 pairs too. So they're both doing quite well on this board. So it makes sense that Isildur sizes up his bet a little bit. Back then you didn't see many small bets anyway. So, okay. So far, so good. And Daniel's not going to be raising this flop super aggressively because, he's got a lot of decent hands, but he doesn't have as many amazing hands, right? He definitely has 6s, and he might have 9s. They are a little bit deeper, so maybe he has 9s. Jacks, I assume he mostly 4-bets. And then perhaps he has a hand like pocket 4s now. Probably not, but who knows? Isildur bets a little bit under 3/4 pot. I think that's a pretty good sizing. You could go even a little bit bigger if you like, but it's fine. And KidPoker. Wow, so KidPoker min raises the turn almost. This looks really, really strong. It almost looks weaker when he shoves, right? You would think that if he just has like, whatever, 6-5 of clubs, let's say, or like, Queen 10 of clubs, that he perhaps just shoves. So when he min raises, it looks even stronger. Maybe this is some kind of level, who knows? Let's see. So if Isildur has a hand like queens, I expect him to be shoving here. So now he does call. So he might just have a draw. Or he might just have a hand like Jack 10 and he's not comfortable getting it in. Let's see what Daniel does. Wow, okay. Let's think. All right. So Daniel shows up here with 8-7 of clubs. I don't mind the raise, especially if you believe that Isildur is very aggressive with barreling hands like King 10, King Queen, just random stuff. But why not raise all in? I'm not a big fan of this small raise. And then Isildur bets with Ace Queen on the turn. So on the flop, he's kind of like, protection, merge betting. On the turn, he's basically betting as a bluff, hoping Daniel folds. But then when he gets raised, I mean, I guess he's thinking he blocks Ace Queen and Queen Jack. And when Daniel does this, he's got to draw a decent amount. Isildur could just have the best hand. He could have, he could have out sometimes. It's quite loose, that's for sure. So, had Daniel shoved, I bet Isildur would have folded. But it doesn't matter because he improved, right? And I like to check back on the river. I mean, he can still bluff unpaired hands. He doesn't have to bluff with a 7. Does he win often? No, but sometimes. So I'll give Daniel... I'll give him a 6.5 out of 10, and Isildur, I'll give him a 6.5 out of 10 as well. I understand their plays, they have merits, but it's a little bit spazzy.